Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family. Talk about foster, adoptive, and kinship care. I'm Dawn Davenport. I am both the host of this podcast as well as the director of the nonprofit creatingafamily.org. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to many a foster, adoptive, and kinship family's heart, and that is the holidays with children who have been exposed to trauma. Trauma impacts our kids. We know that. And it's confusing sometimes how that impact happens. And it seems that so often during the holiday season is when we see a lot of the impact. And there are for good reasons that is the case and that we'll be talking about. So I'm especially happy to bring you this show at this time of year. Our guest will be Rebecca Robotham. She is a licensed clinical social worker at Beehive Counseling and Wellness in Connecticut. She is also an adoptee and a former foster child. This is a re-airing of an episode we did several years ago. It is as timely now as it was then, so I hope that you enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed re-listening to it as well. Welcome, Rebecca, to Creating a Family.
Thank you for having me, Dawn. I'm so excited to be here today.
Well, there are so many sources, sadly enough, for trauma for children. And many adoptive and foster kids have experienced trauma before they come to our homes. And we're talking about things like neglect, prenatal exposure, abuse, domestic violence, and actually just the actual fact of a child having been removed from their home, or if it's international adoption, removed from a child welfare institution or an orphanage. That in itself is traumatic. So let's start by talking about how trauma can impact kids. And I know that could be a course in itself for the full semester. So I'm going to ask for the crib note version here. So let's talk about how trauma can impact children.
Yeah, so trauma can impact children in so many different ways, both physically and emotionally. Some of the physical aspects of trauma can be their behavioral changes, whether they're clingy or crying more or having increased tantrums. Sometimes children can even get aggressive during the times if they're having a triggering moment. The other thing is children can often experience somatic symptoms such as headaches, stomach aches. You can see the increase of like sulkiness or anxiety or just appearing to be really down. And so I always say for all parents, and especially for parents who have children, adoptive or children, if they're serving as foster parents, to really check in with the child to find out how they're doing and what may be happening with them.
Mm-hmm. And to be, at least if they see a change in behavior, but to be aware that trauma may be at the root of this change. All right, so we are entering the holiday times and times of joy, times we've looked forward to oftentimes, for many of us for the entire year. So what is it about these holiday times, especially those concentrated in really starting in starting in Halloween, really, but then moving into the Thanksgiving in October and then many of the religious holidays in December. What is it about the holidays that makes it hard for kids who've had trauma?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that contribute to that, and especially with trauma. And I always explain I used to be a program director for a foster care program, and one of the things that I really had to emphasize to foster and adoptive parents is to understand the actual or symbolic loss that the children have experienced during that time, and oftentimes to not always take offense to the changes in their behavior, because oftentimes it's a triggering moment for them, and holidays can really create that. Think about even in our own personal lives that sometimes holidays can remind us of all of the wonderful joys and togetherness and looking forward to being with family and friends, but it also reminds us of the losses that we've experienced. And oftentimes, at least as adults, we've developed the skill capacity of being able to say, I'm not doing so well because of the holidays. And just children, depending on age and development and skill level, that they're still kind of sometimes struggling with the language of being able to express that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I think of is the thing about the holidays that sometimes that I look the most forward to is a relaxing
Mm.
of our routines. But that relaxing of routines can be very dysregulating for all kids, but in particular for kids who have experienced trauma.
Absolutely. The overstimulation of that. Just think about tons of people coming into the house, most likely changes in routine, changes in diet, additional sugar, additional fats, like stuff that we normally take in moderation is a
Yes.
little bit different during those times. It's
Oh,
like we have
absolutely.
excess and plentiful.
Well, yeah, and that's part of what we look forward to, and we also sometimes kind of put some of our family rules by the wayside. If
Mm.
Grandpa is having 3 slices of pie, or a slice of every pie that's on the table, and Junior wants to follow suit, everybody smiles and allows it, and then afterwards, Junior is bouncing off the walls, or Junior's throwing a tantrum, and is perceived as a brat, but in fact, Junior is on a sugar high at that point.
Yeah. And Junior probably just needs a little bit of extra space and some time to be able to cool down. So it's really important. I'm hoping with most foster and adoptive parents that they've received some training on the impacts of trauma on children, so that they can understand to not always take offense to those behaviors. Like sometimes a child isn't just acting out to be acting out. It may be a deeper issue, or they're just simply overstimulated. Think about your 4-year-old who's had too much candy, or they're overtired and all of a sudden they have a meltdown. It's not because they're
Hmm.
acting out, it's because they're simply tired and they need a
Hmm.
break.
Yeah, and another thing I think about for the holidays is the unbelievable buildup of anticipation, and we as adults
Mm.
feed that oftentimes because we're trying to create magical moments. So there are presents wrapped under the tree, or if you're celebrating Hanukkah, presents wrapped and presented in the evening, but with the anticipation that that's coming, and yet we're not allowed to open those until the appointed time, and then there's going to be Santa Claus coming, and there may be an elf on a shelf that you've got to find and worry about. So there's all of this anticipation, and we feed it as adults oftentimes because we think that our children will like it. But I guess that also brings, I guess it's a different type of overstimulation, but it also brings overstimulation.
Yeah, that you've made a really good point. And once again, it's really important as the foster or adoptive parent to really kind of check in with the child to find out what were some of their traditions. Maybe they had traditions, or maybe they didn't have any. And so they may not even know how to respond to certain things, or maybe they come from a totally different cultural or religious background. So really, how can you incorporate their customs and religious beliefs and into the new family's celebration and holidays? So it's really important to check in. I always say that sometimes we have to be creative of how can we still surprise the child, but making sure that we're meeting their needs at the same time and understanding their needs and their customs and traditions.
Hmm. You may have heard me remind you before, but we have 12 free courses on our website. These courses are supported by the Jockey Bean Family Foundation. It's through their support that we're able to offer these to you. You can get to see which 12 courses are at bit.ly/JBF support. The courses are directly relevant to those who are actually parenting. So be sure to tell a friend about it and check it out at bit.ly/JBF support. Another thing that makes me squirm a little, because this is pointing the finger at us parents, but another thing about the holidays is that often we as parents are distracted. They're
Mm.
sisters and brothers or parents coming in. There's more food to be cooked. There is oh gosh, did I get enough presents for, I forgot to get, my nieces and nephews something, or let me count up the presents I've gotten for my kids, and is it all even? And then there's holiday parties, so we're going out more. So we as parents are not as present oftentimes during the holidays, and that lack of presence, I would assume, could also impact our children's behavior.
Absolutely. And so I would encourage parents to be mindful of that, right? Once again, check in. Sometimes it's really important for children to feel validated. And oftentimes, especially think about all the changes that they're experiencing, especially if it's a new or adoptive home, and the fears or even the misbeliefs that they may have. And so it's important to just kind of check in. And I know that gifts and the holiday traditions are so important, but sometimes it's really just wanting to be with that parent, just maybe checking in with them and to see what it is that they need. And sometimes it's not always a gift. Sometimes it's really about spending time with that child, getting to know them a little bit better, and helping them to kind of slowly help them to feel comfortable in being a part of a new family system.
It's interesting. I totally agree with you. I think that most parents anticipate, with brand new kids coming into the home, that they anticipate some of this behavior. I think what often catches them by surprise is when the child is not brand new. And the
Mm,
one thing that we hear, if I could choose one phrase that I have heard uh, more often than not from parents, is the word sabotages. They will say it feels like the child is
mm,
sabotaging the holidays. And that can look like different things. And some of the things that we've heard from parents would be that on Christmas morning, the child refuses to come down or throws a fit while everybody is opening presents, or the child runs away the day before, or it feels like
mm.
that. Again, the word that parents will often use is sabotage. Have you heard of that in your practice as well?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that, once again, traumatized children often see things from a different lens, right? Trauma can really change the brain and how we look at the world around us. And so with children, because of the abuse and neglect that they've experienced, that there's sometimes this fear of abandonment. And oftentimes children will sabotage a situation to see sometimes, and a lot of times it's not done consciously.
Hmm.
Most of the time it is done unconsciously to see, is this person going to stick by me? In my worst moments, will they stay there?
Hmm.
Will they take the time to understand me? And so it's really important for the parent to kind of take that back, really to let the child know, like, look, we are here for you. We're going to be there. We understand that this might be hard for you, but also setting the appropriate limits and boundaries with them too, because don't forget, children naturally are going to test their limits. And so it really is a balance in parenting during that time, but also really important of validating, even a child that you've had in your care for a while, or you've adopted maybe even since birth, to say, it seems like you're having a really hard time right now. Let's talk about that. And what's going on with you. And we're concerned about your safety. So validating maybe definitely how they're feeling, but the behaviors that you're also observing, but also kind of holding them gently accountable at the same time to say, look, you have to stay safe. It doesn't mean that, just because we're telling you the things that you have to get done doesn't mean we don't love you. We're still here. We're still going to support you. But it's our job to make sure that we're keeping you safe and that we're providing for your needs at the same time.
Hmm. And if you think about the word sabotage, it's implicit in that word is intent. That the child
Mm,
to sabotage something means that the person who is doing the act is intending the act. And I think it's helpful to pull back and think through all the things that we've just talked about earlier about things about the holidays that could be triggering for kids and to
Absolutely.
think through those things. And so shift your mindset from sabotage to I have a kid who is struggling right now, as opposed to I have a kid who is sabotaging my holiday and my
Yes.
enjoyment and kind of, ruining my mellow here. I think that doing that bit of a mind shift is a
Absolutely.
helpful thing to do.
Absolutely. And I would just like to add too is building that relationship and trust, right? So children are, once again, this is not always intentional, and 9% of the time it isn't intentional. But children need to trust their caregivers. And so as the parent, I've heard different things of, well, they're not coming to me, but it's also our responsibility to go to them, and to really try to help form a trusting relationship with that child, and to make sure that, it's cohesive. And if you're struggling, don't be afraid to get help. This is what this is what I'm here for. This is what many mental health professionals are here for, is to provide that support, even during these, joyous but sometimes difficult times.
Exactly. Okay, so now we're going to move into the practical stage of this interview. What can parents do about it? And I want to start by saying that if you have a brand new kid in your home, you should be expecting that the first holiday season can be difficult.
Mm,
But if you're one of the people who has written us in Facebook or sent us private messages or emails or whatever, talking about how the holidays can be difficult with your kids, which you've seen it in the past. So if nothing else, you can make a plan. You can anticipate whether your
mm,
child is new or if they've struggled in the past during the holidays, you can anticipate that they're probably going to struggle again. So I think the number one tip would be to come up with a plan of how you're going to do things differently this holiday
mm.
season. So now let's move into, all right, so number one, come up with a plan. All right, so what are some of the things that parents might do differently this year to address? Now you've mentioned one, I'll throw that out there, and it is the find out if your child has had traditions prior to coming into your home, try to find out what those
Absolutely.
traditions are and incorporate some.
Yes.
Okay. So can you think of another tip?
Yeah, the biggest thing that children with trauma have experienced is the loss of control, right? A lot of decisions have been made for them, sometimes without necessarily their say. And so, in
Very
order to
often,
really
yes.
so in order to really form that relationship and to have a plan, incorporate them into the plan, especially if the child is verbal. What is it that they would
Mhm.
like? If they're feeling unsafe, what are some things that they can do? How do you teach them skills in emotional regulation? So it's really finding out, like I always say, to watch the behaviors and to figure out how do we adjust the plan, or how do we incorporate the child into that, so that they feel safe, and so that they feel like that they have an outlet where they can talk about their feelings, so that they're feeling validated.
Mhm. Excellent. Okay, I'll throw out a tip. As much as we sometimes as parents want to let go of the routines, it is important for most children, I think, to have the basic routines kept in place. They can
Mm,
stay, and on certain nights they can stay up later, but for the most part, bedtimes should be about the same. The times the kids wake up should be about the same. If they take a nap, then that needs to be continued. If your habits are to have bedtime stories and prayers before bed, that needs to kind of stay the same, with the exception, on one night you can bend it, but if you're going into a season, you need to be thinking in terms of maintaining the fundamentals of your routine. And if you do that for most of the time, you can get away with things slipping for a day or two.
I absolutely agree. And I would also like to add is, if there's going to be a change in the routine, let the child know. Say, hey, today
Yeah.
the things might be
Mhm.
a little bit differently because there's going to be A, B, and C going on today. So your nap time might change a little bit, or you're going to go to bed a little bit later than usual. So maybe let's talk about how you can get some rest in between that, or what do you feel like you might need to kind of help you feel supported during this time, if anything, So once again, children do better when they're prepared for circumstances. Kind of the same thing as adults, right? If someone is saying we're going A, B, and C, and no one is telling you what's going on, but you just kind of have to go with the flow. Well, sometimes that's okay. But I find that most people in general do better with knowledge, right? So if I know that things are going to change a little bit, then we can kind of prepare for that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah. And here's this, even if you have not ever used, or it's been a long time, a visual schedule is sometimes really doesn't have to be fancy, but a visual schedule that is just sticky notes stuck to the refrigerator that kind of outlines the basic format of the day. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to have lunch, then everybody's going to have a quiet time, and then grandma and grandpa are going to come around 3. You guys can play outside, then we're going to come in, and just the basic, and you can do it with pictures if your kid is can read, you can do it that way. Even if it seems simplistic and you haven't done that for a while, just knowing that if your kid is struggling, having a visual routine is also very helpful.
I agree. Absolutely. Whether it's either written down or they have a visual that they can see. And just you remind them that, sometimes, because some children get really stuck to time, I've noticed, especially children with like maybe ADHD or autism, they kind of struggle sometimes with like, well, you said we were going to be doing this at 3:00. So to let them know that this in between these times, I always tell parents to say, between 3 and 4, we're going to be doing, this. And it might be that way you have a little wiggle room, so you, as a parent, you don't want to set yourself up too much,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to, you don't want to set yourself up for more problems because let's be honest, especially during the holidays, keeping to a really tight routine is going to be hard. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so give yourself a little wiggle room. It's good.
Okay. What about handling the buildup of anticipation? Thoughts on how to handle that? The surprise element, the surprises, the anticipation, the excitement of what's coming, and if that's dysregulating for a child.
Yeah, once again, that's really about communication, talking to the child, right? Some of us do really well with surprises, right? But then sometimes some of us don't do so well with surprises. And so finding out who your child is, right? Are they super excited about the element of surprise, or does it make them more anxious? And if you see that it may make the child more anxious, then let them know that the surprise is going to be something positive, that it's something that they will potentially that they should enjoy, and maybe giving them a little bit of hint of what it could be, but not necessarily disclosing what it all is, and just really communicating with them. What are their fears around that? Exploring their emotions, like are they feeling sad? And have there been times where they've anticipated something but have been disappointed? And so once again, we're not sure where those emotions are coming from, but as the parent, communicate with them, talk with them, explore with them.
Yeah, there was a really wise mom that is part of our online support group, and one of the things that she had a child who was, in her words, sabotaging the holidays, and had been doing it, and she
Mm-hmm.
was anticipating it, and she realized that her child really struggled with the concept of surprise. She both had
Mm.
unrealistic expectations of what things might be. In other words, she was going to be getting something in her mind that the family simply didn't, she was 10 and was thinking she was going to get the newest iPhone or something along those lines. Or she just couldn't stand that was how she started manifesting when she got older. But when she was younger, she was opening presents, sneaking down at night, opening hers, opening other people's. And the mom finally realized this is a child who, for the surprise is not good. This is not, it's for me. I want to see the magical moment when they
Mm.
open their presents on Christmas morning. This was a family who celebrated Christmas. And she said, that was for me, not for her. So she shifted and she had this child, this daughter, help her wrap all the presents, including her own. She wrapped the presents for
Wow.
all the siblings. She wrapped the presents, her own presents. And she said it miraculously took care of all the problem, that the child then had realistic expectations of what she was going to get. She wasn't wondering what she or what other people are going to get. And it really helped settle her down for the holidays. And the mom said it did not seem, for this particular child, to in any way decrease her enjoyment, which is what the mom was afraid of, is that it wouldn't be as fun on Christmas morning. And she said, actually, it seemed to be almost more fun for this child to anticipate what other people were going to be opening, or to guess which of the presents she was going to be opening was what. So anyway, I throw that out there, is that sometimes we're doing things for ourselves as parents
Mm.
because we want the magical moment for our kid, but it really isn't what's best for our child.
Absolutely. And smart and creative mom. I actually really appreciate her thought process and her idea of doing that. Because once again, the holidays, especially for children, it's less about the adults and it's more about them. And so finding out, once again, what is it that they want? You know, how many times children in foster and who've been removed from their families and no one has ever asked them, what is it that you want? What would make you feel okay? What would make you feel safe during this time? What would lessen your anxiety during this time?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's really kind of, once again, getting to know the child. I always say as a psychotherapist, one of the best skills that we can have as therapists is really engagement. And so finding ways to engage your child, finding ways to support your child. And I love the idea that mom did. That was awesome.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to be a sleuth because our children may not be able to articulate what it is they're feeling. But what this mom was able to do was intuit it from her child's behavior. She could
Yes.
see that all the things that were driving her crazy about her kid's behavior had to do with the child wanting to know what was happening, wanting to know what was coming.
Yes.
And so it occurred to her. So you may have to be a sleuth because our children, just like ourselves and our partners, are often not able to articulate exactly what we want.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the buildup of anticipation as having to do with the quantity of gifts coming into the home. Do you have a thought on that? I will share that I do. I think that children shouldn't be getting huge amounts, but I do appreciate that there are families where that is part of their tradition.
Yes. Once again, I always say, what is the purpose of every gift that you give? What is the purpose of it? Like, I think because in some places, children get very little, you know, or it may be something really small that they're really appreciative of. And then you have some places and some cultures and families and countries where children are getting a surplus of gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really needed? And, you know, my answer is going to be, you know, I think it's based on the family, but I also think it's helping children to understand the purpose of receiving the gifts, but also the purpose of giving. And giving can be done in so many different ways. It's not always through gifts. It can be volunteering your time. It could be doing something really kind and helpful to another person. To me, that is a great gift as well. So I would say, especially for most families, I know how we stress so much over purchasing gifts and making sure that everyone has things that they need or want. But maybe talking to the child, what is something that you really, really want for the holiday? Something that you've really been kind of looking at and you're really anticipating of, you know, possibly having, and maybe doing like a list or something that's reasonable, like a couple gift. And then also often maybe, especially if it's part of your family tradition, maybe taking that child shopping to see what they would want to get for someone else, right? Because there's that joy of giving and receiving. But having like 30, 40 gifts, 20 gifts under the tree, I'm not quite sure if that's necessary or not. You know, I would say I would lean more to the no.
Yeah, I do as well. I have had discussions again in our Facebook support group, and I had to shift a little. I mean, our family has again, we celebrate Christmas, so we have the three wise men brought the baby Jesus three gifts, so that's what Santa brings you, and so we kept it that. So we keep it pretty, and then mom and dad have a wrapped gift under the tree, which is usually a book. So we keep things pretty simple, but I did have to appreciate that for
Mm,
some people that really did not feel at all good, which is funny because it feels so good to me, but it doesn't for everyone. But one of the things that we hear is this is much more the case with foster parents. Everybody wants to give foster children presents over the holidays. And sometimes these families are totally inundated with tons of toys and often, toys that are going to break and fall apart and have lots of pieces and uh,
mm.
it- how do families, what would you suggest for that, for families? And sometimes they have the ability to say no, we really don't want, especially because the presents are only coming for one or two members of children that are in the family. But other times it's really hard for foster families to stand up and say, we don't want all of these gifts. Because the child is saying, yeah, I want them. So, what would you suggest for foster parents who are facing an onslaught of gifts from well meaning people, of course, for their child during the
Of
holidays?
course, and I think that we sometimes we want to. I think the thought is well, we want to give the children maybe stuff that they haven't had, or
Hmm.
we want to support them in that. But once again, it's not always about the gifts. It's about time. You can have all of the riches. I've seen people who are very rich but are very sad, right?
Hmm.
So it really shows you that yes, it's good to have what we need, right? Because we all need our basic needs met. At the same time, gifts are not everything. And so it's okay for the foster parent to say, especially if they realize this is getting a little too much, it's okay to set those boundaries, to
Hmm.
especially for foster parents, I know that most likely they're going to have a case manager or a foster care worker that often comes into the home, or there's going to be a lot of donations that come in. You can simply let the worker know and say, hey, we have enough. Please feel free to give that to a family that may need it more. The other
Hmm.
thing, if a child has a surplus of just stuff, then even for my own child, I say, we're going to clean out some things. Let's pick a bunch of items that you don't want anymore, or that you're simply not using, and we're going to donate those items. And I make the child a part of the process.
Oh, that's a good idea, but and do it beforehand too. I do know of a family that says for every thing we put on the toy shelf, we have to take something off. So
Mm,
kind of that thing that if we need to clean out before Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, so that we can make room for what new things that we are going to be getting. Yeah, that I like, and then the child
yes.
can be a part of that. Hmm.
Yeah, and don't forget about the activities too, which is really important. Like sometimes children just want to spend time. They want to have fun.
Hmm.
They want to share a meal together. They want to do a special activity together.
Absolutely. And considering giving a gift of an activity rather than a gift of something
Mm,
tangible, subscription to Six Flags or a local museum that your family likes to go to, a children's museum that so all year you can appreciate that, or a day shopping trip or something along those lines where it's the gift is the activity. I guess a shopping trip is really not that wouldn't be a good one because that's involving again presence, but it's the activity that we're looking for, a gift of an activity or lessons.
absolutely.
Yeah, you can go to the give you a membership at the rock climbing gym, that type of thing.
Mm,
Yeah, that would be something. And
absolutely.
I guess in summing it up, there is, this goes back to what we said at the beginning of our tips section on shifting the mindset from a child who is sabotaging to a child who is struggling. And
Mm,
the corollary to that is don't take it personally. It's hard when your child is
mm,
tantruming or is picking with picking on their sibling, or not going to bed, or doing any of the other number of things, because this is a busy time of year for you as a parent as well. And it's hard not to think that the
hmm
child is doing it to you. But if we could shift our mindset from not and to not taking it personally, it goes a long way to helping you think of and implementing these other tips that you have suggested.
I agree. I agree 100%. And for all parents too, whether it's, especially for foster and adoptive parents, don't forget to care for yourself as well. I think sometimes that gets lost because sometimes when we're able to regulate, we are much better people when we're able to regulate our own emotions, right? But if we're feeling frustrated and angry, that oftentimes gets projected onto the child and they're just crying out for help or they're struggling with kind of identifying and regulating their own emotions. So don't forget to care for yourself during this process.
Oh, that is a perfect closing note. Excellent. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Rebecca Rabotham, for being with us today. Rebecca is with Beehive Counseling and Wellness in Connecticut. And just a reminder, guys, the views expressed in this show are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the position of creating a family, our partners, or our underwriters. Also, keep in mind that the information given in this interview is general advice. To understand how it applies to your specific situation, you need to work with your adoption or foster care professional. Thank you for joining us today, and I will see you guys next week.